Hi guys, I'm Calico and this is part 3 of my YouTube video series where I read and analyze the book Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. The last video was about our cultural mythology. We talked about what that was according to Ishmael and what effect it had on the planet. Feel free to go watch that and the video before it if you want so you can understand this video better. This video is going to be about laws. According to Ishmael, takers or civilized people have been ignoring a certain law that tells them how they should live in accord with the world. They've been actively going against this law, trying to rise above it and rebel against it. In this video, I want to try and see where we can find this law, and why going against it is bad for humans and the world. In Part 6, Section 1, Ishmael compares the takers to aeronauts a century ago. They were trying to learn how to fly, and they were unsure if the knowledge of how to fly even existed. This is like us civilized people with the knowledge of how we should live. We don't know that there even is knowledge about how to live to be obtained, and most people say it doesn't exist at all. So we have to proceed by trial and error, figuring out what works and discarding what doesn't work, like the aeronauts did with learning how to fly. They had to proceed by trial and error until they could figure out the relevant laws required in order to fly. Ishmael says, the people of your culture are in the same condition when it comes to learning how they ought to live. They have to proceed by trial and error because they don't know the relevant laws and don't even know that there are laws. I think this is pretty accurate. I think we definitely do try to learn how to live by trial and error. Before reading this book, I thought that was the only way you could learn how to live. But Ishmael says otherwise. He's saying that there are laws about how to live, like there are laws about how to fly. We just don't know them because we don't go looking for them. Pretty amazing to hear, honestly. So moving on to Part 6, Section 2. Ishmael says that if there was a law about how humans ought to live, that it would be found where we would expect other creatures to be living, in the community of life. Makes sense? If you want to find laws about living, you should probably look where there is life. Anyway, the main reason we don't go looking for laws about how to live is because our mother culture tells us that there are no laws to be found. But if there were laws to be found, human beings would be exempt from them. Which is strange because Mother Culture doesn't tell us we're exempt from any other laws. We don't think we're exempt from the law of gravity, or the law of aerodynamics, or the law of thermodynamics, or the law of genetics. But meanwhile, if there does happen to be a law that governs behavior in the community of life in general, humans would be exempt from it. Like the law of life, we didn't think of the law of aerodynamics as relevant to us until we wanted to learn how to fly. But when we're on the brink of extinction and want to live for a while longer, the laws governing life might conceivably become relevant. I really think these laws should be relevant to us now. I don't really think there should ever be a time when these laws aren't relevant. They should always be relevant. But I guess we just don't think of them as relevant to us because 1, we don't know they exist, and 2, because even if we did know they exist, we wouldn't care. I think it's very hard to explain to people that if you don't follow these certain laws, you will die. I think most people would just brush it off because they don't see how or why that is. You have to explain why if they don't follow the laws, they will die. Then maybe they can see exactly why it's important to know and follow the laws of life. But as of now, I just think nobody really cares. They see it as irrelevant to them. They're gonna have a rude awakening, though, once they see how screwed we really are from climate change. Who knows how much longer that'll be, though. Moving on, in Part 6, Section 4, Ishmael says, the law isn't about civilizations, but it applies to civilizations in the same way that it applies to flocks of birds and herds of deer. It applies to all species without distinction. According to Taker mythology, man is by definition a biological exception. Out of all the millions of species, only one is an end product. Man therefore stands alone, unique and infinitely apart from all the rest. I agree with this, but I also think there's another reason that we believe we're exempt from the law of life. I think we just think we're above all other animals. That of course animals follow these laws because they have to. But we don't have to because we're humans, and humans are too smart to follow these laws. Basically, these laws exist to govern less intelligent creatures because they need them. But we don't need them because we're too smart for them. Other animals need to know how to live, but we don't because we already know how we should live. This is kind of confusing. I'm kind of skipping ahead here. But basically, takers think that they have the one right way to live. It's confusing because right now we're talking about how takers don't know how to live. But the thing is, we actually do think that we know how to live, which is our way. I'm not going to explain what our way is yet. I don't want to skip too far ahead. But basically, we think that our way of living is the one right way to live. What Mother Culture really means by saying we can't know how we ought to live is that we can't know a way we ought to live that works well. We can know a way that we ought to live, and that's our way. But a way that works well for people doesn't exist. Anyway, my point is, we think that the way we live is the way that people ought to live. And that's why we don't need to know about laws that turtles and butterflies follow. We already know how us humans should live. Therefore, the laws for all other animals don't apply to us. We're smart, so therefore we don't need to know the relevant laws. Rabbits do because they're not smart, you see. They need laws to tell them how to live. But we don't because we're smart enough to figure out our own way to live. And that's the reason that I think that we ignore the laws of the community of life. Because we think we're just too smart for them. Following those laws would mean admitting that we actually aren't smart enough to live apart from them. That we do need them. It would mean admitting that we're not above animals, no matter how smart we are. Being intelligent doesn't exempt us from the law of life. But we like to think it does because, obviously, that means we can live separate from animals, but it doesn't. We still have to follow the law, no matter how smart we become. And I think that's hard for us because we don't like lowering ourselves down to the same peg as animals. Because we believe if we're smarter, that must mean we're above them. It makes us feel special. That we're so much more capable and intelligent than other species in the world. And yes, that does make us special in a way, but not in the way that we're above any one creature. We still have to obey every single law that a cockroach obeys, whether we like it or not. We're not special in that way. We aren't exempt from the laws of the community of life because we're humans. We're not above those laws. And I think that would be very hard, or even angering for most people to hear. You hear all the time about how far above animals we are. How far above insects we are, how far above dogs we are. And how we should be above them because they're less intelligent. How we shouldn't be beholden to gender roles, for example, as prides of lions are. But the truth is, the planet doesn't give a shit about intelligence. These laws exist for a reason, and failure to obey them always results in extinction, no matter how smart you are. By the way, I don't think gender roles are a good thing. I was just using them as an example. I don't really think gender roles really count as law for animals, and I don't think they should be law for us either. It's just an example of what some animals do that we don't do because we think we're above them. So yeah, I don't actually support gender roles. Anyway, my whole point of this tangent is that intelligence doesn't matter. At least not to planet Earth. If planet Earth sees that we're disobeying a law that governs the community of life, it'll make us extinct. End of discussion, and there's really nothing we can do about it. No amount of technology is going to make us exempt from the law. It won't come to our rescue so that us poor humans won't have to lower ourselves down to animals and follow a law made for cockroaches. We have to obey the law. There is no getting around it. In Part 6, Section 5, Ishmael says, "Though the Tagers don't know it yet, the gods did not exempt man from the law that governs the lives of grubs and ticks and shrimps and rabbits and mollusks and deer and lions and jellyfish. They did not exempt him from this law any more than they exempted him from the law of gravity, and this is going to be the bitterest blow of all to the Takers. To the gods' other dirty tricks, they could adjust. To this one, no adjustment is possible." Pretty powerful stuff there. It's kind of scary because it's basically saying, like, our lifestyle will eventually come to an end, no matter how long we try to avoid our inevitable collapse. No matter what we do, our civilization is going to come crashing down. No amount of technology or social programs can save us. The only way we can be saved is if we abandon our civilization, not try to save it. The only way we can be saved is if we choose to live in accord with the law of life, whatever it is. I really don't think people will accept that. At least, not while there's still some deniability that climate change is even caused by humans, or that it even exists. Most of us in the Imperial Core just aren't seeing any real impact of climate change, even though we hear about it all the time in third world countries. I think until people in the first world start seeing real devastation from climate change in their part of the world, they're really not going to be down with this whole changing the fundamental structures of our lifestyles thing. They're just going to wonder why they need to do that when so far things have been just fine. I mean, they haven't been fine, but most people see things as being fine. They're going to think that there's nothing wrong with this lifestyle because so far nothing bad has happened to them specifically as a result of it. I guess we're just going to have to wait for those people to have their eyes opened by devastating climate change. Which sucks for the rest of us who already have our eyes opened, but that's how it is. Ishmael continues, "The effects of the law are very simple. Species that live in compliance with the law live forever, environmental conditions permitting. Those species that do not live in compliance with the law become extinct. And this is going to be very bad news for the people of your culture, the worst they've ever heard." Basically just more doom-saying from Ishmael about us and our civilization. Then in Part 6, Section 6, Ishmael compares our civilization to an aircraft, built with the intention of achieving flight, but is not in compliance with the laws that make flight possible. He tells a small story of an airman who attempts to fly the aircraft but ultimately abandons it before he comes crashing down with the craft. He had no idea that the aircraft was incapable of flight, because he didn't know what the laws were that were required in order to achieve flight. Here is the connection. 10,000 years ago, the people of your culture embarked on a similar flight, a civilizational flight. Their craft wasn't designed according to any theory at all. Like our imaginary airman, they were totally unaware that there is a law that must be complied with in order to achieve civilizational flight. They were experiencing the freedom of the air, freedom from restraints that bind and limit the rest of the biological community. And with that freedom came marvels: urbanization, technology, literacy, mathematics, science. They couldn't even have guessed that, like our hapless airman, they were in the air but not in flight. They were in free fall, because their craft was simply not in compliance with the law that makes flight possible. They see the remains of craft very like their own, not destroyed, merely abandoned. Why, they wonder, are these craft on the ground instead of in the air? Why would any people prefer to be earthbound when they could have the freedom of the air, as we do? But alas, a law is catching up to them. They don't even know such a law even exists, but this ignorance affords them no protection from its effects. This is a law as unforgiving as the law of gravity, and it's catching up to them in exactly the same way that the law of gravity caught up to our airman, at an accelerating rate. 1,000 years before, even 500 years before, they would probably have noticed nothing, but now what they see alarms them. It's as though the ground is rushing up to meet them, as though they are going to crash. And the takers have to pedal even harder and more efficiently than before. But oddly enough, the harder and more efficiently they pedal, the worse conditions become. Everyone is looking down, and it's obvious that the ground is rushing up toward you, and rushing up faster every year. Basic ecological and planetary systems are being impacted by the taker thunderbolt. Basic, irreplaceable resources are being devoured every year, and they're being devoured more greedily every year. Whole species are disappearing as a result of your encroachment, and they're disappearing in greater numbers every year. There are optimists who say, "We must have faith in our craft. After all, it has brought us this far in safety. What's ahead isn't doom. It's just a little hump that we can clear if we all just pedal a little harder. Then we'll soar into a glorious, endless future, and the Taker Thunderbolt will take us to the stars, and will conquer the universe itself. But your craft isn't going to save you, quite the contrary. It's your craft that's carrying you toward catastrophe. 5 billion of you pedaling away, or 10 billion or 20 billion, can't make it fly. It's been in free fall from the beginning, and that fall is about to end. Trial and error isn't a bad way to learn how to build an aircraft, but it can be a disastrous way to learn how to build a civilization." That last part made me think about how the left, or really most people, talk about climate change. I feel like the peddling that Ishmael is talking about is environmental programs and renewable energy. These are things held up as climate change solutions, but when you actually look into them, they really aren't helpful at all. Recycling doesn't do shit, and renewable energy is pretty much just as bad for the environment as our usual sources of energy, just in a different way. I feel like people rely on these solutions because they feel like they have to. Tearing down our civilization and replacing it with something more sustainable is hard, so they feel like they have to turn to renewable energy and green programs in order to have some sort of peace of mind about climate change and our impending doom. Basically, the first best thing seems scary and impossible, so we'll go with the next best thing and treat that like it's just the best thing we can do without returning to monkey. It's not the best we can do, it's kicking the bucket so that we can avoid our inevitable consequences a little longer. They're not real solutions. The best we can do is something that most people don't want to do. So it's highly unlikely that it'll become popular among leftist circles and environmentalists. We'll just have to deal with inadequate solutions to climate change until they literally can't ignore the law anymore, I guess. Until then, they'll just keep pedaling away on the Taker Thunderbolt, laughing at those of us who try to warn them about the law of life. Sucks for us. In Part 6, Section 7, Ishmael says, "The community of life on this planet has worked well for 3 billion years, has worked beautifully, in fact. The takers draw back in horror from this community, thinking it to be a place of lawless chaos and savage, relentless competition, where every creature goes in terror of its life. But those of your species who actually live in this community don't find it to be so, and they will fight to the death rather than be separated from it. All this comes about because there is a law that is followed invariably within the community, and without this law, the community would indeed be in chaos, and would very quickly disintegrate and disappear. Man owes his very existence to this law. If the species around him had not obeyed it, he could not have come into being or survived. Then about 10,000 years ago, one branch of the family of Homo sapiens sapiens said, Man is exempt from this law. The gods never meant man to be bound by it. So they built a civilization that flouts the law at every point, and within 500 generations, in an eye blink on the scale of biological time, this branch of the family of Homo sapiens sapiens saw that they had brought the entire world to the point of death, and their explanation for this calamity was, not that you takers may be doing something wrong, but rather that there is something fundamentally wrong with human nature itself. Pretty interesting that we think that humans are flawed and don't just go looking in the community of life to see what we're doing wrong that other species aren't doing. We just want to believe that if only people were fundamentally good inside, then we could go on living the way we're living and taking more than what we need without any repercussions from the natural world. We wouldn't have to deal with any of the consequences that come with taking more than what you need. And we could just continue going on as we have been. I agree with Ishmael. I think it's our story that's flawed and not us. I think we just need to stop enacting our story and return to some form of sustainability. Not return to monkey, but, build a new civilization off of the laws of life, as Ishmael suggests. It just sucks because I really don't think that people want to do that. And I feel like I and maybe a few other people who have read this book are the only ones really suggesting that we do so. This kind of talk is not that popular amongst the mainstream left. But what else do you expect when climate change has yet to really show us first world people its effects? So that's where I'm gonna leave this video off for today. In part 4 of the series, I want to talk about what the law actually is. What we do that no other species on the planet does, and how it affects the planet. If you liked this video, you can like and share it if you want. If not, it's okay. No pressure. So yeah, that's where I'm gonna end it. See you next time. Bye.